Some people do not fear love when it is far away. They fear it when it arrives softly, sits beside them, and asks nothing but honesty. Because love is rarely only about love. It touches older rooms, silent rooms, rooms built long before language was strong enough to explain the ache inside them. A delayed reply can feel like abandonment. A kind gaze can feel suspicious. Closeness can feel beautiful for one moment and unbearable the next. So the struggle is not always in the heart's ability to love. Sometimes it is in the body's memory of what love once cost. Sometimes it is in the quiet belief that being chosen is temporary. And sometimes what looks like distance is only protection wearing the face of indifference. When love feels heavy. Love is often described as light, warm, liberating. The kind of feeling that opens windows inside a person and lets fresh air return to places that had gone still. But for many people, love does not begin that way. It begins as pressure. A message appears, and the chest tightens before the smile arrives. A relationship deepens, and instead of relief there is restlessness. Someone offers tenderness, consistency, care, and something inside begins to retreat. Not because the love is wrong, not because the feelings are absent, but because closeness can wake up emotions that distance keeps asleep. This is one of the quietest heartbreaks in human life, to want love deeply and yet feel burdened by its presence. From the outside, it can look confusing. A person says they want intimacy, but avoids it when it becomes real. They long to be seen, yet become uncomfortable when someone truly notices them. They ask for honesty, then panic at what honesty reveals. They crave reassurance, but cannot seem to hold on to it once it is given. There is often shame inside this contradiction, a private sense of defectiveness. The painful suspicion that everyone else knows how to receive love naturally, while they stand at the door of it, uncertain, tense, and already preparing for loss. So they overthink small changes in tone. They read danger into silence. They mistrust calm. They wait for warmth to cool. And beneath all of this, there is usually loneliness. Not the obvious loneliness of being alone. The quieter kind. The kind that lives inside connection itself. The loneliness of being near someone while still guarding the most fragile parts. The loneliness of smiling while bracing. Of being held while remaining half absent. Of wanting to rest in love, but not knowing how to stop scanning it for signs that it might disappear. Sometimes this struggle becomes a pattern so familiar that it begins to feel like personality. Difficult, independent, too sensitive, bad at relationships. But many patterns that look like character are only old survival strategies repeating themselves in new rooms. And so the story begins here, not with failure, not with blame, but with recognition. Because when love feels heavy, the problem is not always love itself. Sometimes the heaviness belongs to everything love has touched before, the first lessons of love. Long before a person understands romance, they begin learning the emotional language of love. It happens in ordinary places, in kitchens, in car rides, in bedrooms lit by hallway light, in the pauses between a child's need and an adult's response. Before the mind can form philosophy, the body is already collecting impressions. Is comfort available? Is affection steady? Does closeness soothe, or does it confuse? Is care freely given, or must it be earned through silence, perfection, usefulness, or emotional restraint? These early moments rarely announce themselves as life-defining. They seem small while they are happening. A parent who is warm one day and unreachable the next. A caregiver who provides everything material but remains emotionally distant. A home where love exists, but only when no one is difficult. A family where tenderness is present but unpredictably. A childhood where feelings are treated as inconveniences instead of invitations. The child does not call this trauma. The child calls it normal. And that is what makes early love so powerful. It does not simply shape belief, it shapes expectation. A person grows up not only remembering what happened, but quietly organizing their inner world around what came to feel inevitable. If love was conditional, they may begin to confuse worthiness with performance. If love was inconsistent, they may learn to cling to fragments and call that devotion. If love was overwhelming, intrusive, or emotionally unsafe, they may discover that distance feels more regulating than closeness ever did. Sometimes the wound is not what happened. It is what never happened No one came to notice the sadness behind the good behavior. No one translated fear into safety. No one stayed long enough in the emotional moment for the nervous system to understand that distress could be met, held, and survived. So the child learns adaptation, to become easy, to become exceptional, to disappear, to anticipate moods, to need less, to feel less, to earn, predict, or control what should have felt freely mutual. Years later, adulthood arrives, and the old blueprint is still there. A person may say they want deep, gentle love and truly mean it, but another part of them is still living by the first lessons. Love is unstable. Love must be secured. Love leaves. Love demands. Love is safest when it is slightly out of reach, and so they repeat familiar emotional climates, not because they enjoy pain, but because the nervous system often trusts what it has already survived. This is how the past enters the present without speaking. Not as memory alone, but as preference, fear, instinct and longing shaped by old weather. The mind. The body. The Bond psychology has a language for some of these invisible patterns. Attachment, emotional conditioning, implicit memory, nervous system responses shaped by early relational experience. But beneath these terms is something deeply human. The body remembers what the mind cannot always explain. A person may consciously know that a partner is kind, patient, and sincere, and yet when that partner gets too close, replies too slowly, asks for emotional openness, or offers a level of consistency that feels unfamiliar, the body may respond as if danger has entered the room. Not because danger is truly present, but because the nervous system is built to detect patterns before the conscious mind has time to interpret them. This is not imagination. It is biology meeting history. The brain is always asking a quiet question. Is this safe? And safety is not determined only by logic. It is shaped by repetition. The amygdala, the part of the brain involved in detecting threat, does not care much about beautiful promises. It cares about what has been paired with pain before. If closeness once led to criticism, engulfment, abandonment, or emotional unpredictability, then intimacy itself can begin to carry a charge. This is why love can feel destabilizing even when it is healthy. Attachment theory helps explain this paradox. When early relationships are secure, closeness tends to feel grounding. A person can need, trust, separate, and reconnect without losing themselves. But when attachment is marked by inconsistency, rejection, or fear, intimacy may become tangled with anxiety or avoidance. Some people become hypervigilant, always scanning for signs of withdrawal, thus trying to secure love before it vanishes. Others move in the opposite direction, protecting themselves through distance, self-sufficiency, or emotional shutdown. Some do both, depending on who they are with and which wound has been touched. The body also stores emotional memory in ways that are not verbal. This is called implicit memory. It lives not in clear narrative, but in sensation. Tightness in the chest, a drop in the stomach, the urge to flee, the impulse to over-explain, the inability to relax into affection. These reactions can arrive before thought, because they were formed before language. And perhaps this is one of the most important truths. People do not only think their way through love, they feel their way through it with nervous systems built in relationship. So when love feels confusing, the answer is not always hidden in personality. Sometimes it lives in old circuitry, old associations, old alarms. The heart may be reaching for connection, but the body may still be guarding the ruins of what connection once meant, wanting closeness, fearing it. 2. This is where the inner conflict becomes most visible. A person wants to be chosen but becomes suspicious when they are. They want someone to stay, but start preparing for departure long before anything has gone wrong. They ache for tenderness, then feel exposed by it. They crave certainty, but sometimes lose interest the moment certainty arrives. Love becomes a room with two doors. One opens toward intimacy, the other opens toward escape. And many people spend years standing between them, exhausted by the movement back and forth. Sometimes this conflict looks like overthinking. A simple shift in tone becomes evidence. A quiet evening becomes emotional distance. A partner's independence feels like rejection. The mind starts working constantly, trying to predict pain before it arrives. Every unanswered message, every moment of ambiguity, every small change becomes a possible threat. The person is not being dramatic. They are trying to survive uncertainty with the tools they learned long ago. Sometimes the conflict looks like withdrawal. A relationship gets deeper, and suddenly the feelings become blurred. Affection feels like pressure. Need feels dangerous. The person becomes colder, quieter, harder to reach. They may tell themselves they have lost interest, when what they may have lost is regulation. Closeness begins to touch old vulnerability, and distance feels like relief. There are also subtler forms of resistance, falling for unavailable people because longing feels safer than being fully met, choosing intensity over peace because chaos feels more recognizable than calm, testing love instead of trusting it, becoming the caretaker so that needing less can feel like control, keeping one foot emotionally outside the relationship just in case the ending comes. Beneath all of this is often the same hidden grief, the fear that real love will eventually demand the one thing the wounded self cannot easily offer: unguarded presence. Because to stay emotionally open in love is to risk disappointment without armor, to be known without excessive editing, to let another person witness not only charm and competence but confusion, dependency, tenderness, and fear. For someone whose earliest experiences taught them that vulnerability leads to pain, this can feel less like romance and more like exposure, and so they resist what they long for, not because they do not care, not because they are incapable of depth, but because some part of them still believes that closeness is where the injury begins. This is the tragedy of unhealed attachment. Love is desired with the heart, but negotiated through old defenses, and those defenses, once life-saving, can quietly become the walls that keep the very thing they ache for outside. The moment something becomes clear. Healing rarely begins with a dramatic revelation. More often it begins in a smaller moment, a sentence that lingers, a pattern noticed for the first time, the quiet shock of seeing that the same pain has worn different faces, but told the same story, different people, different timelines, different endings, and yet the emotional atmosphere has remained strangely familiar. This is the turning point. Not when the wound disappears, but when it becomes visible. A person may begin to notice that they are not simply reacting to the present. They are reacting to echoes, to old meanings rising inside new experiences, to the ancient fear hidden beneath ordinary moments. The delayed reply was not only a delayed reply, it brushed against abandonment. The calm partner was not only calm, they felt unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity stirred distrust. The argument was not only an argument, it touched something earlier, something that once taught the body that conflict could threaten belonging. For a long time, as love may have been interpreted through a single painful assumption. If it hurts this much, something must be wrong with the self. Too needy, too distant, too broken, too much, not enough. But eventually another possibility appears. What if the struggle is not proof of unlovability? What if it is evidence of adaptation? This realization changes the emotional landscape. Shame softens, even if only slightly. The person begins to understand that many of their most confusing behaviors were not random flaws, but intelligent responses formed under emotional conditions they did not choose. Hypervigilance was an attempt to anticipate loss. Numbness was a shield against overwhelm. Perfection was a way of securing affection. Withdrawal was protection. Even the hardest patterns begin to reveal a hidden tenderness when seen clearly enough. They were trying to prevent pain, and still, there is grief in this awareness. Because once a person sees the pattern, they also begin to see what was missing. The safety that never settled into the body. The gentleness that arrived too inconsistently. The permission to need without fear. The experience of being loved in a way that did not require shrinking, performing, or guarding every vulnerable edge. Clarity does not erase sorrow. It often deepens it. But it also makes something else possible. A different kind of relationship to the self. Less accusation, more understanding, less obsession with fixing, more willingness to witness. The person stops asking only, "Why am I like this?" and begins asking a more compassionate question. What happened inside love that taught me to protect myself this way? And sometimes, that question is where the old cycle finally begins to loosen. Learning a gentler love. There comes a point when love is no longer judged only by how intensely it is felt, but by how safely it can be lived. This is a quiet shift, and not an easy one. For someone shaped by inconsistency, chaos can feel strangely alive. Intensity can resemble passion. Anxiety can masquerade as chemistry. The stomach drops, the mind races, and it all feels significant. But gentle love often arrives without the fireworks the wounded nervous system has been trained to chase. It is steady, clear, unhurried, and at first, that kind of love can feel almost invisible to a person who has spent years equating emotional activation with depth. To learn a gentler love is to slowly recognize that peace is not emptiness. Consistency is not boredom. Safety is not the absence of feeling, but the presence of enough trust for feeling to unfold without panic. And yet this learning asks for a subtle kind of mourning, because part of the self may still be attached to the old emotional world, the one built around proving, pursuing, enduring, guessing, the one where love had to be secured through vigilance. Letting go of that familiar tension can feel disorienting. A person may miss the drama not because it was good, but because it was known. The body can grieve even what harmed it, simply because it became fluent in surviving there. So integration is rarely a clean transition from wounded love to peaceful love. It is often uneven. A person receives kindness and feels suspicious. They encounter steadiness and want to test it. They are loved gently and still wait for the hidden condition. This does not mean nothing is changing. It means the nervous system is learning a new language slowly. In that process, love starts becoming less performative and more truthful. There is less pretending not to need, less disappearing to preserve dignity, less overgiving in exchange for security, less reading silence as immediate doom, not because fear never returns, but because fear is no longer the only interpreter in the room. Something soft begins to grow where panic once governed. The ability to stay present a little longer, to name what hurts without collapsing into it, to receive care without immediately doubting its motive, to understand that boundaries are not punishments, and closeness is not captivity, to let love be relational instead of strategic. This is not perfection. It is not a final arrival at emotional immunity. Old wounds still speak at times, old reflexes still rise, but they are no longer mistaken for destiny. And perhaps that is what healing inside love really is. Not becoming untouched, but becoming less afraid of tenderness that does not demand survival. What love was always asking. In the end, the struggle with love is rarely about love alone. It is about memory, about protection, about the body's faithful attempt to keep pain from repeating itself. It is about all the silent conclusions formed in early tenderness or early absence, all the ways a person learned to brace, bargain, perform, disappear, pursue or detach in order to remain emotionally intact. And yet beneath those strategies something softer has usually been waiting all along. Not a perfect self, not a fearless heart, just a human one. A heart that did not become complicated by accident, but by experience. A heart that may have confused longing with danger because longing once ended in loss. A heart that learned to hide because visibility once felt costly. A heart that still wanted love, even while protecting itself from the shape love had once taken. This is why the struggle deserves compassion more than criticism, because many people have spent years blaming themselves for responses that were built in seasons of emotional uncertainty. They called themselves difficult when they were frightened, cold when they were guarded, needy when they were undernourished, detached when they were overwhelmed. They mistook adaptation for identity, defense for deficiency, but love, in its deepest form, has never only been asking for romance, it has been asking for truth. For the quiet courage of seeing what enters the room when closeness begins, for the willingness to notice the old stories without becoming imprisoned by them, for the tenderness to understand that some parts of the self learned fear before they ever learned trust. And maybe that is where something sacred begins, not in becoming effortlessly open, not in never trembling again, but in recognizing the tremble without shame. To struggle with love is not proof that the heart is broken beyond repair. It may simply mean that the heart remembers, and memory, especially emotional memory, does not loosen through force. It loosens through being met differently, through enough gentleness, enough clarity, enough safe presence, that the old alarm slowly realizes it is no longer living in the same world. So perhaps the question was never, why can't love be simple? Perhaps the quieter question is this: what did love once mean that made the soul learn to hold it so carefully? And in that question, there is no judgment, only understanding, only stillness, only the beginning of a softer kind of truth.